I identify as spiritually and culturally Muslim. When President Trump suggested a Muslim registry, I decided to identify unapologetically as Muslim American. Now, this means many disparate things because the way I choose to identify doesn't sit well with many purists. I don't veil. I don't view the hijab as a symbol of feminist empowerment. Now, I'm not going to judge women who choose to veil voluntarily. The key word, of course, being what? Voluntary. Because in many societies, women and girls are forced to veil and are imprisoned or worse if they refuse. Now, I don't always fast. I don't go to the mosque. I've never been on Hajj. I have no plans on going on Hajj and circling the Kabah Sharif, our sacred stone, 7 times. Now, since I'm not a traditional Muslim, many Muslims are not going to view me as such. But this ironically goes for the West as well, because I don't fit into any of those neat little categories assigned to Muslims. The way I see it, the most vocal and visible symbols of Islam that are deemed relevant by the Western media machinery hearken from 3 main camps. 1, the Salafist fundamentalist elements. We know about those guys and gals, right? They're bombing things. They're terrorizing. They're stoning adulterous women in town square. Then you've got the hipster hijabis, who are trying to valorize and normalize some very conservative traditions. Then, number 3, you got the lapsed Muslim apologists, who vilify the religion and pander directly into Western Islamophobia. Now, I don't fit into any of these categories, so I've had to forge my own spiritual identity. What I realize, though, is there's a lot of us out there, right, who inhabit a spiritual space of our own interpretation. And for me, in the end, it's all about interpretation. Now, like most spiritual adventures, mine began under duress. I barely graduated from high school due to various academic and disciplinary infractions, which we won't get into. I failed to be admitted into a single college. And so my parents, who were living and working in Beijing at the time, made me come over there so they could keep an eye on me. Now, to say I was wayward or floundering or lost would be an understatement. And it was at this time my father, a self-described agnostic, entreated me to pray with him every day. Now, my family originally comes from Bangladesh, which is a tiny, mostly Muslim, but officially secular country in South Asia. Now, my parents were not conservative Muslims. We celebrated Christmas. I love Christmas. They did not teach me formally how to pray. They did not, denounce alcohol or BLTs as sacrilegious. I remember the first time I had pork, I was in 2nd grade, and I went to a classmate's house, and her mother served the most exotic dish, franken beans. And I loved it. So I went straight home and I told my mother, I ate pork and I loved it. And she said, that's terrific. She never served it, but she did not admonish me or punish me or lecture me. So naturally, many years later, when I was with my father and he said, we're doing this, we're facing Mecca every day and we're praying, I was more than a little resistant, and I was resentful, and I was intimidated. Because like many Americans, I got most of my information about Muslims from either Hollywood or the media. So what I saw was this, or a derivation thereof, or this. These were the messages embedded in my psyche. We were either savagely violent or distressingly oppressed. There was no in between. And you know what? I was coincidentally a Muslim. I could have just as easily been the daughter of Norwegian herring fishermen. You can picture me in that sweater. But kismet, or fate, had landed me in a secular but culturally Muslim family. Now, I didn't feel like I could go against my father's wishes. And looking back on it as a parent, I understand his desperation. He wanted to take me in hand before I completely screwed up my life. And I think he thought that the discipline of ritual ablution, the bathing and the washing before prayer, and genuflecting at the same time every day would have a calming effect on me. And he was a busy man. He had an important job. He translated all the Quranic passages in English for me so I could understand what it was I was reciting, and he wrote out the Arabic phonetically. But in the end, it didn't work. I did not surrender to this version of Islam. I did grow closer to my father, an added benefit, and I did develop an appreciation for the meditative aspect of prayer. Now, it wouldn't be until many years later, in 2000, 2001, when I would be forced to confront my Muslim identity. In 2000, I would move to the United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi specifically, with my young son and my husband. And it would be there in 2001 when I would witness 2 planes fly into the World Trade Center live. Now, I wasn't too thrilled in the UAE for various reasons. I was leading the luxurious life of an expat, but guess what? I had to register as a Muslim. Can't get away from that registry. And even though I was an American citizen, because this country was run by Sharia law. So if I was caught with alcohol as a Muslim or in a bar, I could be jailed. Now, naturally, I just did whatever I wanted. Thankfully, I didn't get caught, but it still bothers me to this day. I was also unhappy, and restless rather, because I wasn't answering my calling, which was to be a writer. I had my master's in creative writing from New York University, but I was doing no writing. The atmosphere I was in was consuming me, as well as motherhood and marriage. Then 9/11 happened. In the UAE, a Muslim country, I was legally a Muslim, but not spiritually such, because I smoke, I drank, I worked out in shorts. I get to America, and I'm nothing but a Muslim. And not only that, I'm possibly an enemy combatant who has to prove her loyalty to her country. So 9/11 left me feeling unmoored with no one to claim me. So I write this incredibly emotional and impassioned op-ed or letter, and it eventually gets published in, of all places, the Indian Express. And essentially what it was an apology filled with shame and rage, leveled at Islam and Muslims in general. Like many Muslims, I felt personally responsible for what had happened. Now, 20 plus years later, so many things have not changed, except me. And when I say so many things have not changed, what I'm observing is that religious fundamentalism across the board is on the rise everywhere. More women than ever are taking hijab, even in secular countries like Bangladesh. And even more distressing, hate crimes against Muslims and Muslim Americans have risen by 78% in 2015 alone in this country. So where does that leave me? A secular, searching Muslim who doesn't want to eschew Islam anymore, but wants to forge her own Islamic identity on her terms that suits her needs. So finally, after 9/11, I was compelled to write. And I wrote a short story that eventually evolved into a stage play called Raisins Not Virgins, a romantic comedy about jihad. Yeah, I'm proud of that title. And it marked the beginning of my exploration into my Muslimhood, so to speak, and how I wanted to present myself in the world. Now, the title, Raisins Not Virgins, refers to the Islamic belief that if one martyrs themselves in the name of Allah, they're going to go to heaven and they're going to get 72 comely virgins. Now, scholars are positing that the word for virgins, hur, in the ancient Syriac, H-U-R, which is a precursor, by the way, to Arabic, Syriac is, were swapped for huri, virgins. Now, raisins were considered a delicacy at the time. They were compared to gems and pearls. However, some wiseacre realized really quickly that offering raisins to a bunch of hardworking martyrs who sacrificed everything for Allah wasn't going to be sufficient inducement. So he, and I say he because this Khan has patriarchy written all over it, decided to interpret it as virgins, knowing that sex would garner more recruits. When I stumbled on this article in 2002, it was written by a scholar, an Islamic scholar named Christopher Luxembourg, which I'm pretty sure is a pseudonym. And I was floored, because what that indicated to me was Islam was flexible. It was organic. It was subject to interpretation. It wasn't this hard, stern thing that laid down edicts that were intractable. It ignited my imagination, and I started to write. Now, the writing led to research, and this research led to one of my biggest personal revelations, the concept of ijtihad. Now, bear with me, because I memorized this definition, but I know I'm going to mess it up. Ijtihad is the technical legal term in Islamic law that describes the process by which somebody comes to an independent interpretation of a legal source, such as the Quran. What? No. The Quran is the book of God. It's the word of God. It's not subject to human whims and interpretations. But there it was. Ijtihad. This ignited me. And so I kept researching, and then I discovered yet more revelations. And one of them is that the root word of ijtihad, jahada, means struggle. And it shares the same root as the word jihad, which means spiritual struggle. Now, the word jihad has come to take on, as we all know, terrible connotations. But what it means is internal struggle, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, maybe political, but not this outward violent thing, war, which so many extremists have chosen to interpret it as. That is not what it means at its core. And ultimately, the explanation that I found the most appealing and resonant was that both ijtihad and jihad are essentially, or connote essentially, the internal struggle of the heart and mind to make sense of the greater world. The search for gnosis, spiritual mystery, which so many Sufi mystics, such as Rumi, he's real popular with the hipsters, and Rabia, a woman, devoted their lives to exploring, communion with their beloved, Allah. And it's not like they didn't question her, Allah that is. It's that in the search for true wisdom, they questioned themselves more. Now, this defied all my notions of what devout Muslims look like. When I learned this, I felt I could breathe. And as a result, I was able to breathe air into my protagonist from Raisin, Sahar Salam's fictional lungs. Now, Sahar, she was messy. She was chaotic, foul-mouthed, hard-drinking, borderline promiscuous. She was insecure, childish, but her struggle was real and it was honest. And it was an emblem of my jihad, my personal struggle. Now, I realize, again, this is so personal to me, but upon all this revelation, what I discovered ultimately is that Islam is a personal religion. I am not required to sit there and listen to someone dictate to me what my devotion or spirituality looks like. I don't need a cleric or an imam telling me what to do. That some people interpret it as necessary, but it is not necessary. I can pray anytime I want, anywhere I want. I can go to a all-inclusive resort in Costa Rica, pray in a bikini, and hit the open bar later. That's my business. And I take sole responsibility for my choices. In the words of a character from Raisins Not Virgins, Miriam, a hijabi, you don't have to genuflect to find God. Now, as personal as this journey has been, I realize it's really not unique to me. I think there are so many of us out there right now, so many of you sitting here right now, who struggle internally in your hearts and minds every day to make sense of the greater world. A world that is seemingly on fire right now. What I would say is do not be afraid to apply your version of ijtihad to your life, be it emotional, professional, spiritual. For me, for the time being, I will take what I need from this glorious religion and I will ignore the rest. As in the words of Rumi, the knowing lies in knowing what to ignore. Thank you.